Welcome back everyone to part 5 of my Tokyo Revengers story analysis. I want to start things off by saying I don't mean to be random or sporadic with my uploading for this series. I want to make sure that I'm taking ample breaks from the story so the next time I make a video about it, corners aren't being cut and I can deliver the best analysis I can in my eyes. Weekly videos on differing stories or topics within stories keep the freshness in my mind and keeps my interest as well. I fully intend on finishing this series before the end of the year, so I thank you for your patience. Moving on though, looking back on the previous arcs of this story, I began to see a trend taking form from the past 2 arcs that this arc continues. That trend being specific arc related characters, with Baji and Yuzuha being the prime examples. Baji and Yuzuha both serve a similar role in instigating the central conflict of the arcs they are introduced in, but they are there to serve the story for that arc and nothing more. While I don't see this as an issue in storytelling as a whole, it's making the audience care about these single arc characters that does matter. If per se they had been introduced as characters of some greater importance like Baji was supposed to before the arcs they are key in, the problems they face could have been more emotionally charged for the audience. When looking at these characters, they serve a narrative and thematic purpose, yes, but I have no attachment to either of them as characters. All I could say when reading the stories behind them was, wow, that's awful. I wonder how Takemichi will connect with them. The story has geared me to care more about how Takemichi will affect them in the story rather than how they will affect the story itself. It stops the characters from being their own persons in the story and more pieces to fit into a puzzle, which is really sad because Baji and Yuzuha are interesting characters to me. However, despite this trend carrying over into the Tenjiku arc, it is not indicative of the quality of the material for this week at all. So without any more stalling, let's dive into the Tenjiku arc. The arc that could have ended the entire story. Beginning this arc are 2 flashbacks for the characters of Mitsuya and Emma. These flashbacks serve 2 different purposes with a similar end goal. Mitsuya's expands on his philosophy of family and not hating the situation he was born into. Emma's is purely for some background on where she comes from and her relationship to Mikey. This introduction seemingly centralizes the 2 as key characters for this section of the story, and the relationship they share with Draken may play a large part of that. But an assault on Toman by a rival gang brings things into focus. A mysterious gang popping up out of nowhere might have been a decent mystery had the Black Dragons not done it in the first place, and Kisaki revealing himself to be the mastermind right off the bat. Kisaki taking on a direct central role as an antagonistic force was bound to happen eventually, and with this reveal there is a sense of finality that comes with it. Kisaki has always posed a sizable threat, but with his knowledge of Toman's ins and outs, he's much more dangerous than before. There's always been a conscious effort to destroy Toman by all other threats we've seen prior to Tenjiku, but this time there's a distinct level of brutality and organization to this attack that is meant to break Toman down completely. Ex-leaders from other gangs like the Black Dragons and the Hatani brothers, who made an appearance all the way back in the Valhalla arc, have converged into one unit for Toman to face, except the odds seem insurmountable because Toman has never been hit like this before. This makes Kisaki out to be on another level compared to everyone that came before him. He builds tension and places himself at the heart of this conflict. Unbeknownst to him though, a request by one of Tenjiku's big 4, Kakucho, sets Takemichi on a path to save Izana Kurokawa, Tenjiku's leader, from Kisaki's control. Kakucho is an interesting addition to the roster because there's never been anyone from an enemy faction who's asked Takemichi for his help or had any real connection to him except for Kisaki. Furthermore, the idea of Kisaki being a time leaper looming over everything puts everything that's happened in the story into perspective. No matter how many times Takemichi fixes something in the past, he always is at a loss by the end. Each time Naoto and he think they've pinned down the root cause for the deaths in the future, Kisaki always finds a way to make things swing into his favor. Therefore, coming to this conclusion makes sense, but there's a possible major crack in this logic. If Kisaki was messing with the timeline, wouldn't there be a change in Takemichi's memories too? Naoto has shown that when the past has changed, he remembers these changes. So unless this knowledge of changing timelines works exclusively with the Time Leaper and their partner, it might be a potential hole in this theory's logic to consider. Or at least that was the thought before Naoto and Takemichi are interrupted during their meeting with Taiju about the uprising of Toman in the present timeline by Kisaki and his forces. Under the assumption Kisaki was overseas, his appearance to execute both Takemichi and Naoto here makes him being a Time Leaper all that much more plausible. Not to mention Naoto's death seals Takemichi from returning to the future, adding to the pile of setbacks that he already faces. He is left completely alone with the loss of Naoto weighing on him, but like before, Hina is there to pick him up when he's at his lowest. It's a moment to emphasize the bonds that he makes are not just important in name, but in practice. Takemichi's influence is something worth his own acknowledgement because, as Chifuyu reminds him, they are all in this together. His level of dedication matters, and that dedication rewards him once more when he's faced with Mucho's revealed alliance with Izana, as Koko assures his survival alongside Inupi. Inupi is a character that follows a number of people in this story who see another as a hero or light in their lives. Kakucho had Takemichi as his light until Izana took his place. Kisaki refers to Takemichi as a hero as well, and Inupi saw Shinichiro in a similar light. This attachment or reverence speaks to the impressionable nature of these children because they want someone who has a heart stronger than they possess or an ambition that they can follow. In essence, they desire a role model to look up to, people who can help them become better people or grow into adults. As it stands though, this is a situation where children are leading children. Furthermore, having Takemichi grow into a proper adult from these conflicts makes Inupi placing his life in his hands the right choice for him and pushes the story forward at the same time. Takemichi growing into a responsible adult is a large part of his character arc after all. However, while he tries to be a righteous, upright adult, the next major event of this story was a product of children leading children to the bitter end of disgusting ideals and goals. When it comes to the character deaths in this story, there's always been a trend from the loss of Shinichiro, Baji, Emma, Aku, Naoto, Hinata, Chifuyu, and so on. They've had a profound effect on Takemichi and Mikey given their respective connections to those people. Every time any one of them passes, the audience is left to dwell on how they will affect these two characters. After everything Takemichi's been through, the suffering he's endured to last him a lifetime, he's been able to find a way to stand up thanks to the people around him, giving him the strength he needs. These connections were thanks to his innate desire to be better, to be stronger. However, the opposite applies to Mikey. Standing at the top of a life where he reigns supreme, there's a distinct sense of isolation that he's experienced since he's lost his brother. No matter the timeline alterations, the heartache within Mikey never leaves him. It never changes. That darkness follows him every leap and festers, chipping away at him piece by piece, blow by blow. And he couldn't accept any of those losses. No one could. Yet the battle against Tenjiku has to happen, and Takemichi stands at the forefront because he is the only one who can. So he leads the charge against Tenjiku, placing his life on the line once more, and with the smallest fighting force imaginable for Toman, it's here that this arc cements itself as the finale for this story. When taking all the other arcs into consideration, there's been an escalation in stakes and disturbing conduct from these children. What started as brutal yet comical beatdowns with an apparent darkness to this life progressively evolved from beefs between gangs that could be settled in a fist fight to fights where someone before, during, or after the battle has to die. Chifuyu calling this a fight between kids is an understatement. That wanting to cling to what delinquency started as versus where it's ended up makes the statement virtually meaningless. You have children breaking arms, legs, and using weaponry to get their way. People are fighting with no regard for human life at all, or the love of being able to test themselves. They have no respect for what a delinquent is. Tenjiku wants to become Japan's darkness. That is what Toman itself fights against, and what makes someone like Takemichi the greatest example of a delinquent. As a delinquent, he never chooses to kill, only to fight so he can leave his mark somewhere in the world while upholding his morals. To be noticed, respected, and to be strong is what many delinquents want, if not all of them. They all chase those three things, but the way many go about it is misguided because they have no idea how to balance the means and the ends of their actions. Their desires become too much to achieve through normal means. Each and every gang has been concerned with the individual players being noticed or respected, never all of the members who make these gangs possible. Toman's ideals of protecting, saving one's family and friends is what sets them apart. Any delinquent can find a home in Toman because that's what it was made for. Mikey's return to face Izana is a moment he has to face the pain of his family at the most unstable part of his life. He's nowhere near recovered from everything he's lost, but understanding that someone has been struggling more than he has, he reaches out his hand. This decision was not just to save Izana, but himself as well. To save the last of his family that needed it, and to ensure he wasn't alone. Unfortunately, Izana had given up the idea of being saved a long time ago, leaving him completely alone in this world. The two have a stark contrast in upbringing and circumstances. Izana is an orphan who had no one except a servant who was practically forced to share his dream. Mikey was raised by his loving grandfather and loved by his siblings. Izana's relationship with his second-in-command Kakucho is a clear opposition to Mikey and Draken. Izana wanted to claim something, someone who would make him feel like he was worth something. That twisted nature born from his isolation fed into Kakucho's feelings of dependence on him. For Mikey and Draken, they had adults who cared for them, making them feel wanted, which enabled them to make meaningful relationships. These two always had a mutual respect and care for one another. Looking at their past and relationship with their second-in-command, it's clear that Izana had a low amount of self-worth from the start. The people around Mikey gave him the respect and love he needed to feel like he mattered. Izana just never had that. He belonged nowhere. He was related to no one, so his existence mattered to no one except for his friend who was meant to be a servant, never a friend. However, thanks to the previous arcs, the family he's lost, Mikey became Izana in a way. He knew his pain and reached his breaking point. After losing Emma, Mikey was hanging on by a thread, trying to grasp for any one part of his family even if they weren't blood related. The crux of Izana and Mikey's connection, placing the kindness of Shinichiro at the forefront, makes this story that much more focused on his death being the inciting incident for everything that was to come. It's a shame though, as Izana isn't the central focus of this arc, leaving him to be remembered as a tool used by Kisaki. Granted, his death is the gateway to the final fight of this arc when he comes face to face with Takemichi. The standoff between Kisaki and Takemichi says just as much as it shows. It's the culmination of every single time leap ending in the place where it all began. The reason for all of this suffering and all of this madness can deflate the tension, as it's a childish reason all this started to begin with. Kisaki's explanation for killing Hina reads exactly how it's presented, a childish grudge because of rejection, which is honestly perfect. Despite all of his cunning planning, stoicism is one thing he could never figure out for himself, and his motivation runs parallel to Takemichi's. Love fueled Kisaki's actions just like love fueled Takemichi's actions. It works as an effective payoff of Kisaki's hero line from Valhalla and the revelation of Hina knowing who Kisaki was in the first place. What cements this revelation as such a great one is how Takemichi reacts. He's willing to kill for what he wants, to stop the ultimate evil, even if that means breaking what it means to be a delinquent. But before he can, a random truck pulls that trigger for him. Kisaki's death doesn't have any real emotional impact, but for the actions he's committed, it's still well deserved. He's dealt a disrespectful, painful death. It was only right because he couldn't die with a sense of respect like Baji, self-discovery like Izana, or be carried by someone who loved him like Emma. Kisaki was always guided by his own emotions, his selfishness, and this was the product of that. He used others to prop himself up for his security, to make himself feel powerful, like he was worth something. A natural counter to Takemichi, who made himself worth something thanks to his hard work to overcome his weaknesses as a person. Honestly, this conflict between Takemichi and Kisaki based around love, diverging paths because of that love, and the powerlessness of both individually but the strength from the relationships they forged in opposite ways, paints this as a true finale for the story. But as we all know, this isn't where it ends. Thank you all so much for waiting, and thank you all so much for watching. Please stay safe out there and have yourselves a damn good one. I'll see you all next time.